Some of you went to the fastest one I did last week. So what I'll do this time, then I started out with a lot of the planning stuff, and then did a course walkthrough at the end. So this time I'll change it around. So we start out with a course, and for those that were participated last week, when I get to the stuff I covered in the fastest one, feel free to just turn off and log out, because of course there will be, on the planning side, most of the things I talked about last week will be pretty similar, so no real news there. So talking about the course as Fastnet and many of the other Rolex races, it's a 600-mile race that will take 4.5 days. And from afar, it looks pretty straightforward. It's basically around Sicily and some other islands. But from both a strategic and tactical perspective, there's quite a few things to be aware of that we kind of got into the details of preparing for the race. And our approach when we race, our main priority doing a course like this is to, and maybe 80% of the stuff we do beforehand is about speed, because this is something that will pay dividends. Since you will spend 10, 12 hours just pushing and getting the last percentage out of the boat is super important. And I will come back to that. Another thing is to keep the risk low. This isn't a race where you perform by making one or two super smart decisions that everyone else misses. This is a race, and as most offshore races, it's a race you lose by taking too much risk and being on the wrong side of the course, or just getting stuck in no wind. So key is to manage risk and to know when to do that. I think it's also important to understand your strength. So the J111 we sail, it's a light boat. It does very well in light winds. So we know that when we come to a part of the course where there's less wind, we can probably go closer to that than many other boats. So there we can use our strength. But at the other hand, when it blows, well, we need to go upwind in 20 knots or a beam reach. We know that that's a weakness from our standpoint, and we have to manage the expectations both from the crew perspective, but also looking at the rest of the crew, fleet. And the last one is decision making. We try to do that as a team. Typically, if you know or have done your homework on the course, you pretty much know when important decisions will be made, and you can take your time reasoning among the crew. And this is also a good way to kind of take out risk, to do small tests and try to go a bit closer to land, or just to make a small tack to see what's happening on the other side of the fleet, and kind of focus on what are we learning along the course, especially if you're doing this for if you've done it 10 or 15 times, that might be another thing. But if, like we do, kind of do a race for the first time and really tries to get the most out of it, it's super important to manage the uncertainty and all the things you don't know in a good way. So looking at the course, and this is the tracker from our year, 2019. And of course, one of the best parts of the race is the start inside Valletta Harbor. And it's not really made for yacht racing, so it's typically very light and hard to find a lane. And it's also hard to figure out the starting line, because one of the mark is way up on the barracks garden, as it's called, with the big cannons. So that's 50-60 meters above the waterline. So to early on try to figure out where the start line is, and of course try to find a lane with as much pressure as possible to get out of the harbor. The classes are not that big, so traffic is typically not that bad, but it's always good to get away clean and not be the last boat off the line. And then the first leg is out to a yellow buoy, a mark where you can turn to northwest. And then there's a short, we had a short spinnaker leg, but it's typically to kind of get the fleet away from the harbor entrance before people start going north. From a tactical standpoint, this should be pretty straightforward. So it's more a matter of getting clean air and of course to have some kind of preparations on what you want to do when you get to the next mark. So if you have questions, just feel free to just unmute and ask them, because there's time to take questions during the talk. And then the first kind of big tactical decision is where do we want to? The island on top is of course Sicily, and the first, the southeast Cape there is the first thing you have to worry about. So it's about positioning for that one, and of course getting into some kind of routines and just sailing the boat fast. And the key thing here, and I think that will, yeah, from a bigger perspective, this stretch from the southeast part of corner of Sicily up to the Messina Sound, that's typically where the race is decided. So it's super easy to get stuck. There's a lot of tricky parts that you need to kind of manage in a proactive way. And you need to be able to perform, you need to get through this pretty clean. And our year, we had 4 or 5 different transitions where maybe 10-15% of the fleet got stuck in each of those. So at the end, when we came to Messina, maybe 20% of our class managed to pull through in a good way. And it wasn't about making, we didn't make any really smart decisions, but we have avoided really bad ones. So first, if we take it from the south, there's 2 places where you, where you kind of can come in contact with land. that you need to manage. And typically you get there in the evening or during the night. And the tracks here is actually from last year, where there were a land breeze, because that's in this time of year you typically get huge land effect both during the day and during the night. So the typical scenario is, okay, you probably want to go, if there's a land breeze and you pass there during the night, you typically want to go close to shore. And there's also a huge valley that kind of draws breeze from land, and that feathers out to sea, in a pretty good way. So typically, if you're there late night, early morning, that probably will be a decent breeze. But then there's the next thing that happens is someone put a huge volcano, Etna, where the wind shadow is massive. So a typical scenario is that people kind of go close to shore during the night. They get the breeze feathering out from the valley, and people get greedy, and half of the fleet gets stuck behind Etna. And here you see the typical tracks where people kind of go into the zone, and then a number of boats go straight east just to get out to the breeze. So before the race, try to understand the typical weather scenarios that will be possible for this stretch. Read up on the land effect. Try to understand kind of what's the game plan, what are we looking for, and because, as I said, the race will be decided here. So the boats that manage to get through will be the top 10 in class, and maybe half of the fleet will be way back without a decent chance to do a comeback. So pretty interesting from both a strategic and tactical standpoint. Our year, we had a pretty big transition where we kind of knew, and the weather models we had were pretty clear on yeah, you want to go east. We had and the typical is you have a light upwind from Malta and all the way up to Messina or Stromboli. Our year, 2 years ago, it was the other way around. We had a light downwind race. So during the night, we were on starboard, tried to go as far east as we dared. And this is a typical example where looking at sunrise, for example, that's a JPK 1180. They went, had a local crew of professionals from Malta. They went super hard all the way out, put all the markers on an easterly track, where we said, yeah, we're pretty sure that will be beneficial, but we're not willing to go all in. So how can we kind of minimize the risk, but still get most of the reward? So we still came out east of the fleet. But when we look further ahead, we see that, of course, the easterly part paid off. And then, yeah, so the land effects, we didn't, since this was a big shift, and that paid off much more than any land effects. And for us, it was pretty much a positioning with the rest of the fleet as well. Then further north, since this was pretty light, this is during the early morning, there was another transition. And here's a typical example where close to land, the breeze died. So there's one boat that actually, the Bewild, that's a Clubs 142. So they were the only boat that's managed to get through during the night when it was breeze, and in the morning when the sun rose, the breeze turned off completely close to shore. So there's a number of boats that parked, and a good, you can look at Jackhammer, that's a J121. So where they are compared to the rest of the fleet, and we will look at them later. So basically, people here are just trying to shoot for any breeze. There's half of the fleet trying to find new breeze close to shore, half of the fleet trying to get out to the breeze that they see that at sunrise, and a couple of other boats got way out to the east. We thought we were east, and we were stuck for 20 minutes or something, so we managed pretty good. And then going further north, here's the zone with both the area where the valley have a good land breeze during the night, and also the red zone with Etna. And as you see, most of the fleet are way east of that zone. And here you also try to position yourself versus the Sound of Messina. On which side do we want to do the sound? Do we have a land effect on the south tip of Italy? So as soon as you get past Etna, there's a number of new decisions to be made. So a pretty fun part if you manage, a pretty tough part if you don't. And then looking at the Sound of Messina, of course, going up, there's not much current, but when you get to the upper part where there's a lot of currents, it can be 3 or 4 knots either way. So it's a timing issue, of course, and I will come back. There's a pretty good app that we use to know the currents. And then there's a traffic separation zone also for northbound and southbound traffic that you kind of need to take into account. And for us, this was a downwind, pretty nice ride in the middle of the night with the Jenneker. And of course, we had the discussion on because you're supposed to pass the traffic, the TSS as fast as possible as you're going against the traffic. So looking at one track where people kind of went along the traffic separation zone, made a jibe and went to northwest. We followed a number of Italian boats that kind of went straight through, and that's a 45-degree angle. And we thought that, okay, if that's the way, I'm not sure that would be okay up here, but this is Southern Europe, and people tend to be pretty relaxed about rules in general. So from our perspective, it was okay to go with a 45-degree angle across the zone. And then you get into the next leg, and I think from a kind of
short question there.
Yeah.
If there's like a more westerly breeze up there, or southwesterly or something, this tongue that goes out there in the sound, is the land high, or?
No, it's pretty low. So the whole tip, you see there's building, and so that's pretty you can go pretty close, and you also see from the depth that it's very shallow, so you can go. It's more a matter of not running aground. You can go close, but then again, it also depends on what time of day. Since I think the bigger part, it's not that it will create a wind shadow, but the land effects both during the day but also during the night are pretty strong, because when the land becomes warm, and there will be big effects. So I can see wind either being generated or dying there. So I think it's more a matter of managing land masses from a thermal perspective than more than anything.
Okay, thanks.
Okay. I've tried to kind of divide it, since there are so many decisions to be made. I think it's good to kind of break down the course, and together with the crew make some kind of run book, or go through the different stages, so you kind of, before the races, you understand them, and you understand what kind of decisions need to be made. And a couple of days before, you typically have a weather scenario that you can discuss around, because 4 days is a long time, and there are the different stages are pretty different. So to break it down as much as possible to be able to have a good discussion. Here we also had another kind of transition where the wind turned and got light, where 3 or 4 everyone thought, okay, so we're out of Messina, we're clear. But then there was another transition, and 20% of the fleet got stuck there. So you can never relax, and you need to keep an eye on the big picture. It was easy to see on the group files and on the weather, but I'm sure a lot of people missed it, because we're out of the hard part now. It's just off to Stromboli.
Speaking of grid files, Peter, what did you get a feel for which grids, if it's the GFS or ECM?
Yeah, so I come back to during the weather part.
Good.
Both on what we did before the race, and then the scenario we saw during the race, where one model worked very good for the first part, and then at some point we kind of changed to another one.
All right, thanks.
But then if there's no, if you manage any transitions that this leg should be pretty straightforward. Typically on this leg or the next leg, the race typically changes from a wind strength perspective. So in a typical race, you come out of Messina in light upwind conditions, and then at some point you're hit by more breeze, and typically there's a broad reach from Stromboli over to the western tip of Sicily. This year we had a light wind from here to all the northern part of Sicily. And if you're lucky, you get to Stromboli during either late evening or early morning, because it's an active volcano, so there's thunder every 15 minutes, and you can see lava pouring out, so it's pretty spectacular. Of course, Stromboli is a high island. It's a volcano straight out of the ocean. So the wind shadow is pretty massive. There's also an exclusion zone that's in the notes of race on the northern part of Stromboli. So you shouldn't get close to the volcano. So that's for safety reasons. But then the hard part is to figure out the land effects around the island. And I think we measured the effects to maybe 7 or 8 times the height of the volcano. So you see boats kind of going in, touching the zone, getting out again into new wind. I think we were pretty pretty safe. So I think the safe route where we were, Warrior 1 got stuck for 30 minutes, 40 minutes. So they were too close. So it's good to understand what's happening here. And here you also need to make a decision on what's the long-term strategy for the next leg, because it's pretty far from Stromboli over to the western part of Sicily. We had another pretty big transition where we knew early on that we wanted to be on the southern edge of the fleet. And this is also where kind of one model had worked very well up to this point, the European weather model. But now, after this transition, the French Arome did a much better job. And we saw that most of the boats kind of just kept going with the European model since that worked very well so far. And typically there's also huge, below this picture, it's Palermo, and it's a huge bay, and the land effect from Sicily is massive, both from a sea breeze perspective, but also during the night. So typically it's a choice between going south and using that breeze, or just staying away, because it also becomes a timing issue. And I think if you look through the tracking from last year, it was a typical example where the breeze, you wanted to go south into the breeze that came off of Sicily, and if you were a fast boat, you made full use of the breeze and got out of the other side. But then at some point the breeze just turned off. So basically the slower boat that went south, they had good breeze for half the way, and then it turned off and they got stuck. And you can basically see everyone kind of turning north and trying to bail out. So it's both understanding the thermal effects, but also a timing issue. Will we be able to get out of there before the breeze turns off or changes direction? Yeah, and then you also, of course, need to figure out how do we want to come into the next corner in a proper way. So here's the islands that you go around. There are it's Trapani, and then it's the distance from shore is okay. So normally you won't get land effects, but cutting the corner can be dangerous. We came here in the morning, and we had the JPK 1180, the sunrise. They went maybe 100 meters closer to shore than we did, and I think they got stuck there for like 4 hours because the land just sucked up all the breeze that were there, and they were local guys. So it's better to be safe than sorry, and kind of getting close to land. If you go there, you need to know what you're hunting for and be pretty sure that it's there. Otherwise, it's a kind of a high risk maneuver. And here we also see we were quite lucky because up till here the conditions were pretty good for us. Light downwind. So here we were in the lead, both in our class in IRC and ORC. And I think we were 4th overall both in both rating roles. So far, yeah, we know our strength. We got to use them so far, but we also knew that we wouldn't be able to keep the bigger boats at bay going back home. And here you can see jackhammer, the J121 that we discussed earlier. So the distance here it's like 6 or 8 hours that they're behind. So they got stuck where we looked at them before, and I think 1 or 2 times more. So the distance becomes huge. And then from here, it's typically typically when you look at all the other races, it's a downwind and heavy weather. So that's what we signed up for. But our year, the wind was the other way around. So we had a upwind in 20 to 25 knots for 2 days. Not that comfortable. But this, even if it's up or downwind, it should be pretty straightforward since there's not much land or big effects from either Sicily or something else. So the kind of a long-term strategy and understanding the bigger weather systems, and then kind of managed to drive the boat hard for because rounding Sicily, you think, okay, we're almost home, just around a couple of more islands and then back to Malta, but it's still 250 miles or something. Those islands are pretty high, but I think the land effects aren't that big. You need, of course, when you get there, you need to manage it, but it's nothing like the Caribbean or Stromboli or yeah. And from there on, it was for us pretty uneventful and a short beat up the northern shore to the finish inside the harbor. And here it's more a matter of just pulling through, hoping to get in before the bar closes. So any questions or thoughts on the course?
Yeah, how did this race differ from normal in terms of weather?
Yeah, so typically what we prepared for and looking at many prior races, it's typically a light upwind to Stromboli, and from there it's 20 knots plus from northwest. So it's typically a broad reach over to the western tip of Italy, and then a super nice downwind from there in heavy air, and in theory that would fit us pretty well as for the J111. This year the wind came from the opposite direction, so we had a light upwind for the first 2/3, and then a upwind instead of a downwind in 20 plus knots. But typically they say that there's the wind, there's never medium. It's either light or the breeze fills in and you get 20 knots plus. So you never get the 14 knots kind of normal breeze. It's either or. So going back to preparations, I think a key, and this is the discussion I had around fastness as well. I think it's important to have a discussion in the crew why you're doing it. What are the ambitions? What kind of goals do we have? And then to be realistic about the time and effort we're willing to put in there, because it's so easy to kind of set a goal for the result. Yeah, we want to be top 10, but then you're underestimating the time and effort it takes to both to get there, to train, to do everything right. And then you kind of invested a lot of time and effort, and everyone is disappointed. So even if we know that we can perform, we never we never go to a race and aim for a specific result. So we go there, and it was the same with a middle sea race. We go there to do the best we can, to not screw things up, to show how we can perform against really good international boats. And the result we get is the result we get. If we get third and screw things up, we will be disappointed. If we become 10th and did a perfect race from our standpoint, that's much more worth for us. So I think this is important because you want it to be a fun experience for everyone. And for most of us, it's a matter of doing the race to be able to put up the plaque and finish it and be able to tell about it, more than trying to beat a specific boat or do a result. The race is actually it's double scoring, but the official kind of the total result and 100% of the boat is racing IRC. So we had two different approaches. So when we did the fastest race, we said, okay, we don't know if we're going to do any more IRC racing, so we'll kind of take what we got and just do the race. So we didn't do any optimization for the fastnet. And going into middle sea race, we said that it's more important to get into the right class to sail with boats that are as fast as we are. So we decided to look into a number of areas to not optimize versus rating, but more to get the boat under 1.110, because that's, 1.1, because that's the cutoff for class 4 or 5 or whatever. So we did shorten the sprit a bit. We didn't bring the biggest Gennaker we had. A couple of small things to just get the rating under the limit to a race in a class with similar boats. Depending on boat, I think IRC is pretty straightforward. So if you have a good all-around boat, you get a decent rating. If you have something out of the ordinary, a sporty boat or something, you might look into a few things to that would be easy wins when it comes to rating, but I wouldn't worry too much about that. A much more important thing is to understand your sail inventory. And it's not about having a lot of sails or sails for every occasion, but to really understand the sails you have and know their sweet spots. Because in offshore sailing, typically when you go around the course or you do an inshore race, you pretty much aim for the next mark. Offshore, if you're going to do 100 miles towards the next mark, and there will be changes in weather, you want to go 100% with the best sail possible. So understanding the sweet spot for the A3 and knowing the sweet spot for the A2 Gennaker, and not doing 100 miles just in between where none of the sails is pretty efficient. so understand that, and also have the whole crew understand which sail should be up when, and be pretty scientific about that, because after 3 days in pitch black, going around an island, to do that on field doesn't work. Another specific thing in IRC is the code. A proper IRC code needs to be 75% mid-girth, and that becomes a pretty terrible sail, and not really a proper code. It is a code, but it's measured as a Jenneker, so it's a huge compromise. This year they're trying to. They have implemented something they call the flying head sail. They are allowed to go down to 62.5 mid girth. That becomes a much better sail, but looking into the penalty rating wise, I think it's almost 0.7%. So from our perspective, that didn't pay off at all. So there again, not many things to do. If you have an IRC code, that will probably become useful, especially in the light air areas. If you don't, I would think, and you're just planning to do this race and then sail in local rules, I'm not sure if investing in a new 75% code is a good investment, but you need to decide how you want to do. Another big issue is, of course, to be able to manage the sails you have, to go from a J2 to a J3 or 3.5 with the heavy weather jib in the middle of the night. I think to have the sail is one thing, to be able to make the change is another. So something to practice and to look into how can we make it as easy as possible to change the sails when we need to, and not be stuck with too much sail waiting for the sun to go up, or just breaking things. There's also a good, I think in a couple of days, North is holding a webinar on sail configuration for the fastnet. I think that will apply pretty much to this race as well. So that could be useful. Then we use Expedition to do both navigation and performance. But then in those kind of races, we also see that it's super useful for a number of other things, and that will require some practice. So the advice I gave last time is to use any race you have during the season and actually try to use both the routing and to run a number of different scenarios on different weather models to really get into usage, and also using Expedition or a similar tool to manage performance of the fleet. So the top kind of the strip chart with the speed over ground for different boats, that's basically always on the screen. Sometimes we even put one of those numbers up on a display on deck to always compare our speed to the competition. So it's one thing to see about 400 meters to leeward. It's another thing to actually measure and compare the speed and communicate that with the crew, because the racing is much more fun, and you actually drive the boat much faster if you have some really good references. And also, looking at the bottom part, this is a typical kind of display where we have our routings, we have all the boats, we have both the IIS tracking within Expedition, as well as the numbers from the yellow brick tracker that's supplied by race management, and to be able to see the competition, the speeds, their tacking angles, running the routing, trying to see what decisions are they making based on the same information that we have. And that makes a huge difference. And especially within the crew, to be able to communicate with them what's going on. So where are we? Where are the competition? How are we doing? What's the next decision? What do we think? What are the scenarios? What will we do if sunrise jibes? Should we jibe before them? Should we jibe to cover them? And then the racing becomes much more intense and fun for everyone. But then again, that also becomes, especially the setup to get all the tracking done on other boats, and getting the tracking information for Yellow Brick into Expedition. It's not rocket science, but to try to do that after the start gun that's pretty messy. Then you need to focus on other things. Coming back to kind of the numbers that we use to run the boat. Number that we always look on is the polar performance percentage, and that's based on the performance numbers that we have on how fast should we be in different conditions, and if we're 100% or close to that, or even a bit above, everyone is happy, and we don't need to waste a lot of energy trying to get the boat to go faster. But then again, if we're on 94 or 96, then we need to do something. We need to change the helmsman, or look into the sail trim, or whatever, and then no one rests until we're back at 100. And that makes it much easier to manage the energy. And it gives everyone an insight on how fast are we really going. And hopefully that's in the right direction as well. And what we also kind of figured out, both during Fastnet and in the Mediterranean, is that it becomes pretty dark during the night or in fog. So you need to drive to the numbers. And typically, especially us that sails in the Swedish summertime, it never gets dark. So there's always a reference or an island or another boat that you kind of can use as a reference. But coming out here, it's pitch black for 12 hours. And if you can't drive the boat fast to true wind angle or heading, you're kind of lost. So it's a good thing to practice that beforehand. I looked into the key here is often the moon. So during the dates in October where the race is on, it's close to full moon. So it should be pretty. If it's not cloudy, it should be pretty decent during the nights. But still, it helps to be able to drive to the numbers. When it comes to safety, most of us in Sweden are used to racing category 3, and this is a category 2 race, and there are some small differences. It's not huge, but it's a lot of small details that you need to be aware of. So you need a PIRB for the boat, safety beacon. You need IIS locator beacons for everyone in the crew. There's some extra things you need in the grab bag and when it comes to life slings and buoys. So many small things that you kind of need to get into the tiny details of. I read it maybe 3 or 4 times a year in detail, and there's new things surprises me every time. So, and then of course it's important to practice both man overboard. We did that on an afternoon just before the race, and also know that you can make the critical sail shifts. If you do the fastnet, you need to hoist the storm jib and the trysail and sail up to the committee boat and show that you know how to put those sails up. That's not something you need to do in Malta, but still it could be a good thing that everyone really understand what are the procedure to get the trysail up. So we going out to sea one morning, we kind of went through that. And otherwise, it's just, I think, the key here and the advice I get most often is just to keep the boat dry, because that will help crew morale and keep the energy up when you get into a blow, and also go through the boat and look at any small details. So that if you think, okay, we will go upwind in 25 knots for 2 days, will this shackle or this line really make it? And if you're in doubt in any way, just go up a notch and stop worrying about what will break next. I think even if we had a pretty tough last part of the race, we didn't break anything. So we were pretty fortunate. But when it comes to planning, of course, Malta is pretty far away. So the logistics to get there is a big thing. We 2 years ago or 3 years ago, we thought that we should ship the boat on with 7-star or Peterson May on a cargo ship. That fell apart just a few weeks before that was planned. So in 2019, we took the boat on truck to Antibes and then sailed it down there a month before the race to be sure that the full logistics were under our control. And this is something, talking to people that do the bucket list races, logistics is maybe the biggest thing that people worry about, and the number one reason that people don't get to the starting line is messing up logistics. Getting to kind of the week before the race, we try to have a pretty structured approach. I know we all sailed with boats that wasn't really prepared, and you spent the night before the race drilling holes for new jib tracks or whatever. And I don't know about you, but I kind of got tired of not being able to prepare in a good way. So what we do, and this become kind of a standard procedure for us, is that a week before start, we like it's a small team. So typically we're 3, and that's kind of the 3 person that A, likes to work on the boat, and B, I trust. I know that when they fix something, it becomes better than it was before. And we spend And typically this become a nice combination of not being too rushed. So combining lifting the boat, going through all the sails, doing everything to get the boat race ready, and still having time left to grab a dinner and have a beer and just have a nice time. And then you know that when the crew arrives, and for us that was Tuesday evening late, you know that the boat is ready and you can kind of just go sailing and don't have to worry about fixing things. So we had Wednesday, and typically there's a coastal race planned. We had a discussion on, okay, do we need Wednesday to practice for ourselves to understand what's going on? But then decided that the waters outside Valletta is pretty straightforward. There's no current. There's nothing to kind of learn about. So just spend 4 hours trying to figure things out wasn't really necessary. So we did the coastal race, and that was good to get the crew working. And then we spent Thursday doing training, going through sails, trying the storm sails, doing the man overboard, and then going to the huge crew party that they had. And then typically we try to get Friday free to go sightseeing or whatever, anything that doesn't have to do with sailing, so that everyone clears their head and are prepared to do a race start on Saturday. And of course, for especially, I often get the question, oh, but can't I fly in on Friday and just jump on board and do the race? And I try to be pretty, if that's really necessary, we might be able to facilitate that. But we want this to be an experience together with the full crew. And if we're going to we spent the year training, the race will be here for a week or 10 days anyways. So let's do this right. And I think for us that's have worked out pretty well. Okay, so coming back to weather, and of course, this is super important to really get into the weather part. What we did before Fastet and what we did again in the Mediterranean was together with Axel Bagdal, who is a Norwegian navigator, weather guy. He used to sail, he did the Volvo Ericsson race on Ericsson 3, and now he's a professional with J-Class and some of the Super Maxis. So typically we spent half a day or a couple of hours in spring to go through the race. So kind of what I did earlier, but then also with proper grip files and actually routing the boat around the race course to early on get a feel for, okay, what is this race? What are the typical scenarios? What should we focus on? So, and then I typically bring in 2 or 3 guys from my team that they don't need to be in charge of navigation, but to have around to discuss those topics and to have first-hand information on the big picture that we got from Axel. And then in the week before the race, so typically we had a Skype meeting with Axel on Wednesday. So that was the first day when the full crew was on site. we did a first routing. The picture down to left on the big kind of picture. What are the low pressures and high pressures, and what the typical scenario? And looking at the picture already on Wednesday before race start, we knew that there's nothing here that will drive a lot of wind. So there was basically 2 isobars throughout the Mediterranean. So we knew that this was going to be a light race. But then get the whole crew involved in, okay, so this is the typical scenario. This is what the race will look like. So they mentally can kind of prepare for what will happen. And then we did the same thing again Friday before race start, again with a video call with Axel, where he kind of went through his perspective on the weather system. And I think the key here, you don't need a professional, but I think it's a good thing to have someone that understands the big picture and can give you a second opinion. So you don't end up just spending time in your grid file, but rather understanding why is the different grid file showing what they're showing. And then, of course, we spent a lot of time on the first kind of stage from the start up to Messina, because we knew that this was going to be super important when it came to how we would do during the race. And looking at the weather in the days before the race, it was pretty evident that the European model were pretty spot on, and that was also confirmed on the first long leg over to Italy, where we saw that a lot of the really good boats with professional crew went hard right, hunting down that transition that was in that model. And that proved out to be pretty spot on for the first 2 days. And I think the tricky part there was basically to and even if that's an art in itself, to be able to manage a number of different grid files or weather models and try to decide on some kind of what's the statistics around this. Is it 80% European model, and then we have a couple of runner-up that we kind of also like, or what kind of system do you have to evaluate those models? And I did a lot of job going down when we did a sail down from Antibes to Malta through Corsica and Sardinia, where the French Arome model performed very well. So I kind of had that in the back pocket and always compared the weather with that one and a couple of other ones. But at some point after Stromboli, we saw that, okay, so the European model is kind of, the timing became more and more off, and looking into the Arome, we saw that there's a good chance that this will kind of take over. So I think to be able to manage a couple of models will help out. And here to the right, there's also the app. So it's called Messina 2021. It's a pretty, there's a number of points, and depending on time, you'll see how much current you have. Pretty basic. At some point, we looked into making that into a grid model, but it was too much work, and then we figured out when we're in Messina, and then it kind of it will make sense when we get there. So invest time in the right things. I think that's important as well. Okay, so if you have the boat in order and you have a rough idea about the weather, of course the critical thing becomes the crew, and it's a big. You can do around Gotland. I think that's 350 miles or something. You will be able to do that and perform pretty good without kind of taking many things into account. You can do that sleeping on the rail. You can do that with lousy food. You'll manage. The problem here is that if you go over 600 miles and you go for 4 days or more, then you need to understand the challenge from a crew perspective. And there's a number of kind of key things there. I think the first is to understand kind of the psychological aspect of things. Do people feel safe on board? Do they feel safe with the team? If it's pitch black and blowing like hell, will they trust each other? So trying to get those aspects into the practice, and if you doing races in the season, to look into the crew dynamics, because that at the end of the day that will make a huge difference. Do I trust the guy who drives when I'm asleep? If I don't, I won't get any sleep, and I will be a lousy skipper. So get that working, and also looking into the different roles. And I think key there is, of course, navigation. So either we tried both having one navigator on each shift. So we run a watch schedule with 3 shifts to have one people in each group in charge of navigation and doing handoffs, or having one navigator but having them out of the rotation, because that will come to do the weather, to understand transitions, to give a heads up on all the important decisions. That will become crucial. So to know that we will have someone that are proactive in the navigation part. I think that's key. The other thing is helmsman. So typically in the kind of racing we do, it's an owner driver, where I own the boat, and when we race inshore, I'm a helmsman, and that's it. When we did Fastnet, we thought we had 3 really good helmsmen, and thought, okay, this will work out nicely. But then again, when it became dark and the weather was hard, no one else did very well. And looking at the French boat that won the class and won overall, talking to them afterward, out of 7 guys, they had 5 helmsmen that they rotated, and everyone had their favorite conditions. And so what we did between Fastnet and Middle Sea was that we added, so I think now we're 5 or 6 guys that we know that any one of us can drive the boat reasonably fast in any condition. Then of course some of us has more time on the boat, and we need to manage that, of course. But I think it's key to bring in people that can steer the boat, that you can get rotation, and to see that they get practice time before the race. So even if you're doing just an inshore race or whatever, to kind of try to rotate early on in the season to get everyone up to speed on that boat. And then the third position that's crucial is the bowman, because at some point It's pitch black, it's blowing 30 knots. You need someone to go up there and do that jib shift or whatever, and that can't be a decision that involves a lot of risk, because then you won't make it, and then usually things go downwards from there. So that's if it's just one position where you read somewhere really good, it's doing bow. And of course it's a physical race, and especially now when you're not sailing, it's always a good idea to stay in shape. That will pay off later. Here's our watch schedule. So what we tried a couple of different ones. What we ended up with is a 3-watch 2-hour schedule where you have 2 hours on, where the only focus is to drive the boat at 100%. You don't worry about anything else. Then you have 2 hours standby. Then you do everything else, doing food, water, carrying sails, tidying up, doing navigation, support for the guys that driving the boat. So we're always 6 on deck. And then we have 2 hours off, and that means without clothes, down below, sleeping for 1 hour and 55 minutes. And this is, we've tried doing this with 3 hours. Instead, we tried doing 2 shifts, 4 hours on, 4 hours off. And that comes down to do something that works for you, your crew. There's no holy grail here, and we see different things working for different teams. But also here, an advice is both to practice before, so everyone understand and know the strengths and weaknesses of the system they're doing, and also look into kind of the composition, because everyone has their strengths and weaknesses, and trying to match them in a good way. I think that pays off. And of course, invest in systems and bunk beds to be able to get some decent sleep even when the boat is heeled over and everything is chaos. Preferably to windward, so you don't lose any performance. Food becomes an issue because, especially, says you will use a lot of energy. We had external help at some point, kind of helping us analyze how much energy we needed. We came down to 4,500 calories per day. In a sunny race in the Mediterranean, it's hard to get this much energy into your body, because the food is it's heavy food, it's a lot of fat, so it becomes an issue that people don't get enough energy. And during a sunny day, that's not a big problem as long as people are drinking. But on the third day, when the wind hits and you need to go upwind, you see a pretty clear connection between the guys that didn't eat enough the day before and the guys that get seasick and aren't able to perform going around the corner. So take this seriously, and for every time, in every evaluation we've done after those races, we come back to being super hard on ourselves. That okay, so eat when we're supposed to eat, and eat more than you think, because that will pay off in the end. But then again, this is also something that the sooner you start to practice it and do an overnight race and try to get into the routines and try the food and see what people think, it's also a good idea. We did that mistakes I think the first year where we tried it out in super nice conditions, and of course it's all the spicy dishes was fine when the weather was nice, but then going into fastnet after one day, half of the crew decided that they wouldn't eat the spicy dishes, so we ended up with half the crew eating all the spicy dishes 3 times a day, and to kind of facilitate that. So do the preparation, and it's more important that people eat than exactly what they eat. This is something we did with psychological safety, where we both before each season and after each season kind of ask people questions about how they think about being in the crew. Do they feel safe? Are they okay with taking small risks without being criticized? Or do they feel okay with speaking up if something isn't right? Small things that especially for middle-aged white men in with good jobs have a surprisingly hard time working this out. But I think for us it's super helpful to create an atmosphere where speaking up about something that's not right isn't about criticizing something. It's about making the team better and preventing things going wrong. I'm happy to share this if it's someone wants it. Okay, so that was pretty much the preparations we did. Any questions? Anything that you feel we should go deeper in? Anyone regretting they signed up for the race?
Not at all. This is George. Thank you very much. I think this is very informative. I don't have any questions at the time, but I might write you and ask you some as they come to me, if that's okay.
Yeah, sure. Now it's a lot of moving pieces, and I think you don't have to. I think it's more important to understand the big picture and be aware of where you kind of did your homework and where you maybe didn't have the time or came all the way, but to kind of understand and have the references on what might happen out there.
Peter?
Yeah.
This is Michael.
Hi, Michael.
I have a question. Was this the first time you sailed the Mediterranean Middle Sea race?
Yeah.
How many years do you have to prepare yourself and the crew by thinking about the race?
So I think there's always kind of the dream stage where people have a lot of different races on the long-term agenda. But I would say maybe me as a skipper and a few of the crew maybe started talking about and planning the race maybe a year in advance. And then typically you get into the discussions on the sail inventory and what can we do to make the boat as fast as possible. And then during the spring, we get into more of a planning of the season to be as prepared as possible.
Will you do it again?
I'd be happy to. it's a wonderful race. It's the guys that have done many of basically all the races, they say that this is the world's most beautiful offshore race. And of course, you're always skeptical going into it and say, "Oh, I shouldn't have my hopes up." But I can see why they're ranking it as so from a nature perspective, it was just amazing.
Thank you.
Anything else? Leif? Pretty straightforward.
Yeah, no, I think it was a fantastic presentation, Peter. Much appreciated. If you had to choose between doing the fastnet again or middle sea, what would you choose?
That's an easy one to answer, right? Just England, that time of year, yeah. Raining, cold.
I think there's a lot of. I have a reputation, so probably the answer should be fastnet. But then I have a J111, and that's a pretty lousy fastnet boat. So actually, doing fastnet, it's you know it's going to be upwind for a long way, and it's going to be pretty miserable at some point. So if I had to choose, I'd probably do the middle sea race again. Because there I know if we get the typical conditions, if we get a light upwind, we might get a light reach from Stromboli and then a downwind in 30 knots plus. Then and this year we were leading 2/3 into the race. So if we were super lucky, we would beat the local guys on the first 45.
Peter, it's Olof. You said when I listened to you talking about fastnet, you said you didn't take help from the locals, local experts, so to say. But did you do it in Malta?
Yeah, so I had a few of the guys on that were racing on Sunrise. There's two big families, the Podesta family that won the race last year, and the race we raced as well, and the Ripard family. They won it maybe 6 or 7 times within the family. So of course we hunted them down and over a beer, trying to understand as much as possible. But then again, I always try to balance that with kind of the actual facts and trying to be as unbiased as possible. And of course, there was some information there, but I don't think compared to doing your own homework and having Axel's help, I think I think I saw the same thing as with fastnet, that there's a lot of common knowledge, but that doesn't always happen.
Yeah, thank you, and thank you for the presentation. Very good.
Yeah, no worries.
Hey, Peter.
Yeah.
So, thinking about the J111, I know you're planning some more offshore races. What did you learn from the middle sea race is there anything you're going to change about the boat for future races that you took away from this race?
Not really. There's always optimizations to be done. So actually we did both fastnet and middle sea with a used, because I felt bad about buying a new 75% code. So we actually had a used sail from Salona 37 that we did both races with. And now we know that we're going to do more races international, so we kind of are buying a new code that we think will help us. We're looking into different a new configuration with a stay sail, but just tiny kind of things that we are developing and things that we do every year. So I don't think there's a big takeaway. If one thing that we kind of thought about was crew weight, since we typically fat is fast and you want to have as heavy crew as possible, but in a typical middle sea race where you first have a light upwind and then a heavy downwind, you probably could manage with less crew, and that would be faster around the course. So that could be a discussion. I wouldn't really hesitate to do it with less crew, but so it's more from our perspective, we kind of, this is the crew we have, and we like sailing together, so we do it with 9.
And you're not going with the new 62.5%?
No, from I think we did the calculations, and last year we had the code up for the middle sea race. It was when it needed to be almost 10% faster when it was up compared to the code we have today. And I can't really, and what we also need to manage now is the long-term plan is to bring the boat to the US, and then there we will race ORR, and they have a completely different setup when it comes to the downwind sail inventory. There they have something called the large roach, or they have a different definition of codes. So right now we're trying to both fit into IRC as well as the races in the US. So that's kind of a balance. Have you looked into it?
I'm trying to, but
I think it depends if you get, but that's the same with any code. If you get the hours, it will pay off. If you don't, of course, it will just hurt your rating.
Yeah, but still, you do get the 75% for free, so to speak here. So there is.
And for us, that was what will happen with that is also that we will kind of get about the 1.1, the class cut off, and then we will race with the 50 footers, and that's not
that's not fun.
That's not. We had that discussion on. Okay, would it be better to be a slow boat, the slowest boat by far in the bigger class, and that will, of course, if we got to park up, then we would kind of run into the big boats again and again, and that could be beneficial. But we decided it was much more fun to be a faster boat in a smaller class.
Yeah, I agree with that. Yep. No, but it's tricky with this new code, and well, probably after this season we know a bit more. But it's I feel pretty much as you are.
From what the calculations we've done so far, it's pretty hard to motivate.
Yeah.
Unless you have too much money and like to do sail tests.
Yeah.
All season.
Exactly. Exactly.
Cool. So I think you all have, where I am and have my email address, and feel free to. I'll do I've done a recording, so this will come up on YouTube as well, and together with a presentation. And if you have questions, don't hesitate to get hold of me.